We've got a table full of guests to discuss what's going on here in Bristol with the implementation of livable neighbourhoods, but also with planning. So in part one, we'll be looking at various things to do with development planning, buildings in the city, the people behind the city, not necessarily in charge at the City Council, but also can't really have an ex-member in here without talking about the merchant venturers at all. I'll also be looking briefly at the Bear Pit as well, because Joe Banks is joining us, local freelance journalist, who's just written an article about the money behind Bristol's tallest building, which is about to be started. They're at the moment demolishing the old Premier Inn at St James Barton roundabout, right in the city, very close anyway to the city centre. So we've got Fadumo, Farah and former Mayor George Ferguson in with us too. I think the best thing to do in a way is to start with you, George, as a former mayor of the city. You were brought in for many reasons. One of those is because of your knowledge of architecture. I think when it was about 1999 or so, when I first came to Bristol, not long afterwards, I came along to a talk of yours in Bristol city centre called Fighting the Philistines, which was yes, about the good
probably
and bad.
Not allowed to say that now.
Well,
yeah.
well, we will anyway. So we say things like that here. I know it's terrible, but I mean, I get exactly the sentiment of what you were doing, and you were taking us through some good and bad architecture, good and bad planning decisions. So, how is it going nowadays? You, as an architect, came in to become mayor, and actually now it's been run for a decade or so by other people. So, what do you make of what's happened?
Well, I think it's sad of what's happening now. I did have a vision for the city, and I have a vision about making community most of all. About it's a people vision, rather than just a building vision. I may be an architect, but I think what really matters is how people lead their lives, and that architects should be there to create good places for people to communicate with each other and to socialise and that sort of thing. And I'm afraid now we have a city that is being basically planned by the developers. And the developers only have one interest, and that is to make the maximum amount of money. And there's been they've been let free. They've been given permission. My successor, because there have only been 2 elected mayors of Bristol, so I'm one of the 2 best mayors that Bristol will have ever had, and one of the 2 worst. My successor decided that we go for height. And by saying that, he's given every single landowner with a spare plot in the city permission just to think that they can put in a planning application, put a 20-plus story building on it. And of course, at the moment, what makes money is student residences, and we have a lot of students. I think that is a great thing for the city that we have a lot of students. I think that improves many of the aspects of the city. They have they bring an interesting cultural life to the city from all over the world. But what they are faced with is being put in these huge blocks. And the problem with that is, to me, is that we live in a really interesting city. It's made up of about 110 villages that came together. It's not a metropolitan city like Manchester or Liverpool or Glasgow. It is it's much more defined by its history, a really interesting history. And I'm not against some high buildings, but what I am against is this freedom of the people with the money to decide where those high buildings go. We should be planning our city. We should have a skyline policy. We should have a high buildings policy. We should allocate where these things go if we're to have these high buildings. Now, it has happened. We're not going to stop it. We have to build homes, so that's really, really important. But most of all, we've got to build homes that people want, that they want to live in, that's good to raise their families in. We don't want to build homes with problems, but I'm afraid that if you have the combination of a city that's planned by the developers and a policy that is only about numbers, promises about producing certain numbers, then we don't get proper thinking about how we make the sort of good city nowadays that has grown up so naturally over the centuries in Bristol.
Well, look, before we get into the future look of the city, the money involved, all that sort of thing, I think we ought to also hear from Fadumo from Barton Hill, and over there's been some pretty extraordinary police turning up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. with the council trying to do roadworks in order to close roads off as something called Liveable Neighbourhood. So could you just tell us, Fadumo, what's been going on, and how did you get interested in what's happening in Barton Hill? Because this is a slightly separate issue. It's an area which there's lots and lots of people living there. Quite a few older tower blocks, maybe 1950s, 1960s. It's not where the big developers want to build all their skyscrapers yet. But it might be in the future. So what's been happening, and how's it been affecting people living there?
So I wasn't involved in the campaign at the start. I was just following the stories and listening to the community. So what happened is the consultation was not done properly. They did not engage the community properly. So the issue is, when you ignore the concerns the community have, it will be a problem, and you will see people against whatever whatever the council are doing. Thursday, 13th of not this Thursday, a week ago, a Thursday at 3 a.m. the police and the council came in Barton Hill. There were like 50 plus police officers, 2 drones, a helicopter, and it was only 3 of us, 3 women on the street. We felt like we were in a war zone, and the problem is we've worked so hard to build a trust with the police and the council, and that was broken that night. We felt we were under attack. They threatened to arrest us. The issue is, at the moment, is implemented, so everything is whatever the police, whatever the council wanted, they achieved that. But what we want to know is the police, how did they end up getting involved in a civil matter? How did they end up creating a whole operation for that night? What we want to find out is how the meetings that police had with the council, the operation name, the minutes of those meetings. That's what we want.
Well, so was anyone arrested? Was there any violence?
No, we were not violent at all. We know our rights. We were protesting peacefully and asking the contractors to stop what they were doing, and so we didn't do anything. We were just standing there. But the police is the one who threatened to arrest us, and they were asking us questions. Think about your family. Is your kids okay? They were assuming that we left our children behind, which is not the case. There's a lot of the campaigners in that area. Most of them are disabled, older people who've been cut off, and some of them have big cars that they rely on, and that's the only way out from where they live. And they felt they were not listened, and they were not being consulted with this scheme. So we're asking the Bristol City Council to think about what for the next step, and do consultation properly and co-design with the community.
Well, so the idea was they were putting a block across the road. Is that right? Is it a bus gate that only buses are allowed through? So
they put 2 bus gates in. Well, we stopped one of them, so one of them has not been done yet. And so far they've put one in right in the middle of Barton Hill. There's another one in Victoria Road. They closed off that one completely, and we've got 3 disabled people who rely on their cars and that road, so they cannot go in anymore. One of the ladies, she had her camper van in a garage when they done it, and now she cannot bring it home at all. So is badly implemented and badly consulted.
Yeah, well, before we hear from George, the former mayor, about this, let's have a listen to yesterday's City Council meeting. I think it's in Transport and Infrastructure Committee, where several of the residents turned up to give their opinion.
For statements, I'll start my timer now. Hopefully you've been warned that you're not necessary to read out the entire statement, but you've got really, should be trying to limit it to a minute and summarise your statement. All the members of the committee have read all the statements. So if we could start with, I'm going to assume the first one on the list is Melissa. Hello, Melissa. Would you like to start your statement, please? And if we can try and limit it to a minute, that would be much appreciated, Melissa, to give everyone a fair chance.
I'm so disgusted. I have nothing to add to my statement, other than I am now a prisoner in my own home. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And the next I have on the list is number 5, Susan Hughes.
I want to start with saying I'm absolutely against the disgusting and discriminatory East Bristol unlivable neighbourhood. This has been implemented without a proper consultation. The council have lied about sending letters out. They have lied about consulting disability groups. The 2 they claim to discuss it with, the first doesn't even exist, and the second have never been spoken to. Many people without internet or email knew nothing about this. I speak to many now who still don't know what's going on. I received 1 letter long after the so-called consultation ended. This so-called trial has already been proven to be a failure and causing immense harm and trauma to thousands of people. Traffic and pollution have massively increased. This is preventing access for disabled residents, causing us to need to make massive detours, causing vast increases in pain, fatigue and stress, to the point we feel we've had our independence stolen. One resident can no longer access their own home in their disability vehicle. This is disgusting and completely unacceptable in every way. The council in ETM have now turned up at 3 a.m. in the morning, bullying and intimidating their way through residents, several of which with disabilities.
Susan, if you could start wrapping up now, please.
ETM assaulted myself and physically restrained me through my mobility scooter, preventing me from moving back. These big burly men, all whilst ignoring the basics of health and safety, suspended a plant above my head. I implore you, do the right thing here and abide by the Equalities Act. The council currently ignored. If you have a shred of integrity, immediately reopen those homes, or you have blood on your hands.
Thank you.
So yes, so transport and connectivity is actually policy committee yesterday with local residents, George. I mean, it seems to have made a bit of a disaster here, and I would point out that we've also had news this week, national news, about things like personal independence payments for disabled people threatened to be taken away by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. And here we have someone who's saying that with their disability vehicle, they will no longer be able to access their home and be a prisoner inside it. I mean, it seems that the disabled people are at the sharp end. Yeah,
I know nothing of the detail of this particular livable neighbourhood proposal, but I think the principle of livable neighbourhoods must be good. The principle is that we don't dominate our living areas with cars, which is what happens. It happens around here. I mean, I know from cycling around eastern streets that they're completely dominated by cars, and there's nowhere for natural play, for instance, and that sort of thing. So I think the principle is right. I'm going to interrupt you there, because when I was growing up, we had about 4 cars in our street. We used to play in the street.
That's right. We had something like what the equivalent of now about 2.5 pence to go on the bus anywhere you wanted to. We used to go up for less than £1 up to London on the train.
Yeah.
What we had with them was a publicly owned transport system that everybody used, and people didn't really need a car.
Yeah, you're an old thing. The good old days, you know.
Well, we used to play in the street. We did.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's been like the boiling frog, you know, not realising what we're doing to our cities. And so we have to stop and think about what makes a good place. Now, I have a principle that if you make a city good for children and you make a city good for people with disabilities, you make a city good for everybody. So I think if one plans from that point of view, then one will make better places. Now, I don't have a car anymore because I live in the city and I walked here. I probably would have cycled here, but funnily enough, I've got to get back so quickly afterwards that I'm going to take a cab. But I just have found that liberating. And I think if people need to be brave about trying to find alternative ways of getting around the city.
Well, you take my point, I'm sure, that we had a good, integrated, cheap, effective, efficient public transport system. On almost all those points now, it's expensive, it's unreliable. The people...
Why is it unreliable?
The people running it aren't even in Bristol.
Yeah, but the main reason it's unreliable is that they can't get past all the cars. So if you're going to have a public transport system in an historic city with a historic road system, you're going to have to clear a lot of those streets and roads.
One of the other reasons
to get the
unreliable
through
is that they're running these things on a knife edge, so that if one driver either gets hurt or is off sick, quite often they just drop buses. I'm sure people around the table have experienced these ghost buses where you're sitting there waiting. It says on the little screen there's going to be a bus in 2 or 3 minutes. 5 minutes later, that bus has just disappeared off the system and didn't exist at all. So it's not just about cars in the way, is it?
It's not just about cars in the way, but I think that the biggest distraction to our city has been the absolute domination of our streets by cars. And I don't know if everybody else here has a car or not. I mean, most of us store our cars, and we store them on the public street. We don't use them that much. You know, you don't... So I think we just need to find a more intelligent way of sharing cars and reducing the number that have free parking on the street.
If you were mayor now, what would have been going through your mind to think, well, we're going to have to do this at 3 o'clock at night with 50 police?
No, that does sound bonkers to me, and it's counterproductive. Why on earth would you do that? I would, I mean, that is, I don't know how that happened. Because the councillors I know are quite gentle people. I passed one on the way here, a very gentle guy. And I can't believe that any one of them would have instructed that behaviour. So where that instruction came from, I do not know. But it does seem absolutely bonkers.
The officers are not gentle. John Smith, we've got John Smith, who is... very interesting guy, very cold. What you're missing here is in Barton Hill area, we've got 8 high-rises buildings. All those 8 high-rises buildings, there's so many families in there. Each family have probably like 2 or 3 and more children. And the schools near us are all full, so we have to take our children so far away, because the schools near us is not suitable. They full, it's short of teachers, and it's not great schools, and that's an issue. And the other issue is a lot of families who have children with learning disabilities, they cannot take the buses because that child needs to be comfortable, calm area, and the buses they don't find it comfortable being in a bus. That's another issue. And the other issue is when they were doing the consultation, they said they had a disability group who were consulted, so we we investigated that, and we found out that disability group don't exist, and it was residents, 1 or 2 residents who were disabled, and that is not enough. They have not consulted a disabled group.
Well, that's a fascinating parallel with actually some investigative work Joe was doing a couple of years ago in Castle Park around the development there. There was a group, was it called Joe the Friends of Castle Park, which was turned out actually not to be really connected much with Castle Park at all. It was a bunch of people who were self-selected, who were
well, it was one person really, and the group had basically been created by the council. Yeah. But that's another story.
It is a bit of another story, but isn't it interesting, George? There's all this trumpeting about consultation. Clearly in Barton Hill that wasn't going on, was it?
Well, if I had Joe's life, which is like, I'm not worried about picking up a toddler here and pick up another teenager at school at the end, I wouldn't mind. I would probably appreciate it. Yeah. But when I have 3 children in 3 different schools, and probably one of them have a learning disability, and he's goes to another school and he needs that calm environment, then I'm relying on my car. And if I'm single mom and I'm running the whole household, I'm relying on my car. So we need to balance everything, and that balance did not happen in Barton Hill area. And Barton Hill stopped 2 power stations. We stopped 2 power stations years ago. I'm not sure what year it was, but we stopped it. So we've done so much for air pollution than anywhere else. And the way they treat it at the moment, those 2 ladies, Sue and Melissa, are my friends. Both of them wheelchair users. They live in the same road. That road is being closed off, and they rely on their car. Melissa has a camper van that she goes away to fun areas all the week. Every weekend she goes away, and now that is out of the window.
Well, that's terribly tragic. Let's have a listen now to Stuart Phelps. He spoke just after those 2 at this council meeting yesterday and brought up some different points.
I'm slightly surprised that you don't have the statutory guidance on implementing low traffic neighbourhoods on your agenda, because it came out on Monday. It has 5 significant points in, but it's probably best summed up by the opening paragraph. Last year, the Department of Transport commissioned a review of low traffic neighbourhoods. This is the outcome. The research shows that while they can work in the right place, and crucially where they are supported, too often local people don't know enough about them, haven't been able to have a say. Increasingly, they are frustrated. We see larger and larger low traffic schemes being proposed by some councils despite concerted opposition by local residents and local businesses, and in some cases being removed again. This guidance makes it clear that should not happen. There are 5 points made in the guidance: that local support needs to be the majority, that your consultation process needs to be robust, and that it has regular reviews even after implementation. And perhaps most significantly, because as far as I'm aware this is a major sea change, the potential consequences of you failing to follow the guidance are that there could be withdrawal of future funding and possibly taking control of your roads under the Traffic Management Act. In other words, putting you into special measures. And finally, DVLA data usage is now being questioned, and there is going to be consultation, which may well restrict your ability to use that on bus gates and the like.
Thank you, Stuart. That's your time. Thank you.
Yeah, so chairing that is Ed Plowden, a Green councillor, that meeting. So what do you make of what he's saying there? What he's effectively saying is, look, these are the rules. You haven't really been following them at all. Obviously, the key thing is consultation. If you're going to be implementing something in a neighbourhood, I'd like to think that the council would turn up with a little van or maybe a gazebo on Saturday and talk to people. This is what we're thinking about. What do you think? And I want to know what form did this consultation take, because you seem to be suggesting hardly anything.
No, the problem is they sent the community development team and Travel West. I'm not sure the name. I think it's something to do with Travel West. And the questions that they were asking was, what does it look like in 15 minutes walk, like in around your area? They never said they're going to put bus gates in or anything like that. They have not discussed anything like that. And what we said was we need a pharmacy, we need shops, all those things. But that hasn't happened, and that is not it's not going to happen anytime soon. And the problem, the council is relying on their officers to do a lot of things, and that, which is lovely. But the leaders of the council, they need to make sure everything that the consultation they follow properly, but they're not doing that.
Yeah, you're dead right. That is absolutely dead right. Yeah.
This is last year's Harbour Festival. I was wandering around chatting, and there were some people there from the Liveable Neighbourhoods team. They were talking about the clean air zone. They had a little section of their stall about that, and I got chatting with them. It turned out both of them had actually been employed working now for the council as a sort of public face from Sustrans, which is the cycling charity based here in Bristol. So it does seem to me that a lot of this is actually about turning Bristol into a great cycling hub and almost ignoring car users. Now, the car's been with us for a while. Yes, we've got too many of them, but it's like do we want to create a hostile environment for cars?
If you're to create a healthy city, and one that kids feel safe walking to school and cycling to school, then I think we do have to tackle the issue of too many cars.
Well, what about disabled mobility? Because that seems to be the main problem here.
Well, you've got to allow for disabled mobility. Of course you've got to allow for disabled mobility. And in this country, we are pretty generous about that. And we have a huge number of people with blue badges.
I do not agree with that at all.
We have a huge number with blue badges who are able to park in places where other people can't, and that's absolutely right. I mean, when you compare it with many other countries I go to, there is a relatively generous system. Now, I know I'd be criticised in terms of particular issues that people face, and we have to face up to those. But I think that if we are to have a healthy city with cleaner air, we have to be brave about it. We have to be able to make these changes.
How can you tell a mom with one of the mom that lives in my building? She's got 2 children with learning disability. She's also a carer. So early in the morning, she goes around to visit one of her service user, does all the washing and everything, and comes back and take the children to school. They cannot sit in a bus. They physically can't, because they're very anxious, they moving around, they need to have their headphones on. So you need to balance everything. But at the moment, what is happening is a lot of people are coming and saying, okay, we need a cycles lane, we need this, we need that, and completely ignoring the other social issues that we have. We need to consider the social issues.
Of course we do.
That hasn't happened.
It hasn't. So look, with this bus gate, I would imagine the fines are going to be astronomical for anyone in a disabled mobility vehicle to go through the bus. I mean, isn't it it's pretty obvious, as with the clean air zone that we've got in the city, that we should have all disabled vehicles exempt. I mean, there aren't that many around. It's not as if those are the main problem.
Are you sure they're not exempt?
I am, yeah. I think
they're not exempt.
I think so,
yeah. Okay.
So it's buses only through here. In fact, even the buses have to pay a fine, don't they, if they're a diesel bus coming into Bristol now. And as that chap mentioned earlier, there's this issue of constant surveillance, checking every single number plate. I mean, it seems to me a lot simpler just to have an old school public transport system, or else here in Barton Hill, just to let everybody know, no problem with disabled vehicles at all. It's something which, and I think for Fadumo here, what they're seeing is something which is just descending on them. This is not the way that democracy is supposed to function.
I absolutely agree. There seems to be a real major failure in terms of the consultation here. But politicians have got to be brave about making changes, because change is often feared and before it happens. And I know from my own experience of bringing in 20 miles an hour, bringing in residents' parking zones where I got protests, that I now go to those areas and people thank me for it.
Well, I drive around, George. I see the police, even the police ignore the 20 mile an hour zones. They're doing 30.
Well, the police might, but people are generally, and this has been well researched, people are generally driving slower in the 20 mile an hour zones, and there are fewer accidents. And when there are accidents, there are relatively minor.
And do you know what? In London, I lived in London in the 1980s when they implemented Fares Fair, which was all about the fact that Ken Livingstone wanted free public transport in London. They had 1,500 less serious accidents on the roads because the buses, more people were leaving their cars at home and using the public transport. It seems to me it's not rocket science. It's called socialism. Yeah. It's called mixed economy, and also it's called knowing how to run the city. And I think to a large extent many of the people running things here just don't have the law on their side or the resources to run the sort of municipal transport system that we used to have in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
The first person I went to go for advice when I got elected as mayor and was slightly surprised to be the mayor was Ken Livingstone, and I talked to him about those things and how they were implemented. What we did is we made some of the early decisions temporary ones to test them out, and I think you can do that with paint and bollards and things rather than put in the major infrastructure straight away, and then you can trial things, and I think that was such sensible advice.
Fadumo, how do you think this is going to go? Because I know, people in Easton and Barton Hill are not likely to just let this lie. They may well just come along with a sledgehammer in the middle of the night and remove this bus gate.
Well, we respect the law. I don't think that will happen, but we will campaign. Today we had almost 40 people came to Barton Hill support us. We were standing outside. Most of us were mums and disabled people, and we are saying to Bristol City Council, you need to listen to the community who vote you in, the community that were took part of the shamble consultation, because it was shamble. They didn't do it properly. They never said they're going to close off the roads, and my friends are struggling at the moment. They're coming out their houses because the road is closed both sides. They put us in a box. Is segregation, as I can see so far. It is a proper segregation.
And everybody that seems to be worst affected by these changes seems to be the most vulnerable, which is the thing that really disgusts me about what this council has done, the Green Council, by the way. So let's have a listen to some more people. This is recorded by ITV West last week. Some people who just, where ITV sent their cameras down, they just took over one of the rooms locally, and a whole bunch of people told them what they thought.
I have epilepsy, so I can't go on public transport. If I were to go on a bus, have a seizure, I need to be in a car and someone can track my location.
I depend on my car to get anywhere. What was now a short journey, so I could potentially go out and enjoy walk around the shops. Now it's got a massively increased journey with increased pain, fatigue, masses of stress. Now no energy to actually be able to do anything. I'm trapped in my home essentially now, and they just don't care.
As a resident of the Bristol City, I just don't like the tyranny and the fact they're not listening to residents. They're ignoring democracy and just doing as they please, and to come out at 3 a.m. and do this is disgusting.
George, what advice would you have for the council leader, the Green Tony Dyer? He hasn't. I've been looking around to see if he's made any statements about this. I've not heard or seen anything much.
Well, I don't know if he has or not, but Tony is a considerate guy, and I think that it's wrong to demonise the councillors. As I said, the ones I know are really caring and gentle. It may be that they've allowed the officers to have too much freedom in terms of what they're doing. I would say that we clearly need in Barton Hill much more rigorous consultation, much more understanding of what people's needs are, answers to the fears that people have. I know that Tony Dyer would understand that, so I don't want to have to lecture him, but What he doesn't have that Marvin and I had as elected mayors, he doesn't have the authority just to do stuff. We were able to decide what the policy was and work with the local communities, some who were not happy in the first instance, to find a way through. With the committee system, it is much more complex. So it's not about Tony Dyer, the leader. It is about the whole council and the various committees and their particular responsibilities, which is a very different way of governing.
So anyway, Fadumo, Farah, thanks ever so much for coming in and joining us. If you will stay with us a little bit, George, I'd just like to...
But can I just say that I really admire Fadumo and what she's doing. We might have had a small disagreement about the way things have turned out or about some of the principles, but the biggest principle must be that people are happy in their community and that they are very involved, that it's not just consultation, but it is involvement in the process that will stop these ridiculous incidents happening.
And we stopped one of the bus gates. 3 women would just, lay down, and they left, and we were screaming our heads off, and it will come off. Barton Hill will be bus gate free very soon, in 6 months' time.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Well, what worries me more than anything else in a way about all this is that, the police can bring 50 people from out of the area as a sort of gang to make this happen. But the trouble is that this encourages the sort of vigilante thinking. Places like Barton Hill, people are very close and the community is very close. So they might think, well, maybe we should get 50 of us, 50 blokes, to take the police on if they try this again. And this is not a clever way to run a city, George, is it?
No, you don't want to have conflict. And I think I'm proud of Bristol being a city of protest. I've written about it. I just think Bristol has great spirit. I hate violence, but I do admire the people who stand up for their rights.
Yeah.
Okay, so if people are interested in following this story, whereabouts are good places to find? And you've got any other meetings coming up the public can come along to?
Yes, please do come to Coffee Conscious. We meet up there at 6:30 every Tuesday. We are
whereabouts? In the settlement?
In Barton Hill? No, not the settlement. Barton Hill. Right, but if you Google Coffee Conscious, you will see where it is.
All right. Or any other search engine, not necessarily Google. But Coffee Conscious on a Tuesday. What time again? 6:30 p.m. So come and join us. We discuss our protesting, how we can complain, freedom of information. So all those. We are a very well organized group, and Melissa is leading us. So yeah. Okay, thanks for that. And it's great to hear that there is some organisation.
Can I just say one more thing?
Course, yeah.
There's 2 organisations in Barton Hill who cancelled the engagement that police used to do with them. So the trust has been broken, and the police have crossed the line when they turned up in our neighbourhood with 50 police officers and helicopter. It's absolutely disgusting.
Well, this is what we do not need, because this is going to spawn confrontation potentially in the future, possibly worse. Anyway, let's just have a listen now to Brett Christophers, who's written quite a lot about privatisation, because even though this is being done by the City Council, we've got a lot of problems with our public spaces, roads, inside things like these large shopping developments where there's private security being privatised.
Over the subsequent years, that private equity firm has sold off, I think about half of that estate. And then this week sold it, the Ministry of Defence bought it back for $6 billion. And it was like half the size of it had been then. And it's just like why was that deal done? It was like anyone could have said at the time that it was an absurd thing to do. They locked in, so they sold it and then leased it back. Presumably it was about, the look of the balance sheet.
I think there was a deficit crisis at the time, right? Something like that.
So it was all about kind of the appearance of the balance sheet. And so they sold it off and then immediately leased it back on long leases of like 99 years or something at predictably increasing rates over that time. And it's been an absolute financial disaster for the Ministry of Defence, and they've now bought it back.
China doesn't do this stuff. That's why they're doing okay. Xi wouldn't have that. It's interesting as well. A lot of this stuff, the most wacky privatisations. Another one is rail under Major. People make these grand ideological arguments for rail privatisation. It was privatised because of a balance sheet. That's like you say. It was because there was a deficit crisis in the early 90s, and they sold off some assets in order to make the numbers add up. And we were running a surplus in 97, 98 because of those choices. I mean, that's it. That's what it boils down to. It wasn't because they thought the private market system can do trains. I mean, they think that as well. Of course they do. But that wasn't the impetus.
Yeah. I mean, the privatisation story, and so obviously we were talking about privatisation of land. I mean, one of the really interesting things about the land story, you asked where it disappeared. A lot of it disappeared with the state-owned enterprises, so water companies in particular. When they were privatised with lots and lots of land, which turned out to be not necessary for their businesses. And so many of them became very, very large property developers. Same in the electricity sector. So National Grid, one of the most profitable parts of the National Grid business is property development business, property rental business. And it basically got sold off for free. So sold off's the wrong word, got given away for free. So that's where a lot of the coal, when British Coal was privatised as well, huge amounts of land disappeared there then, and it was all basically just given away for free.
Why is the state or the contemporary state, why is it so eager to get bad value when it sells stuff? Why is it? Well, it's like saying to the market, please screw me. Please screw me. I want as little money as possible for these assets.
I don't know what the answer to that question is. I think it would be fair to say that I think we have to say that part of this is like it's easy to say with hindsight. I mean, I think at the time when a lot of these privatisations occurred, the way in which the economy subsequently developed and the growth in value that many of these assets subsequently achieved would not necessarily have been predicted by anyone. So I think it's obvious with hindsight that terrible value was achieved. And yes, I think there were some people that said at the time we're underpricing these assets. But I think there were lots of people that probably thought that some of these were reasonable prices. So it's important not to just sort of say.
I appreciate that, but surely,
there's no doubt that lots of bad deals were done. I mean, I think. Look,
surely there are people out there that are still saying, okay, worst case scenario, we're losing hundreds of billions of pounds here. Worst case, do they not think in those terms, or?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I do think there was a couple of things. So one of the reasons, of course, was that when you had the lot of the British privatisations, there was the hope that the UK was going to become a shareholding democracy, right? And that a lot of these firms were going to ended up being owned by the masses. We were going to democratise asset ownership in a way that never, apart from housing, arguably, never really happened. And so I think that was part of the thinking, was that the British people should be able to acquire their assets at a reasonable price. That was part of it. I think that was definitely a part of it, which obviously you saw in the case of council housing, but I think it was a more generalised part of it as well.
So that's Brett Christophers there. He's author of a book called The New Enclosure, The Appropriation of Public Land in Neoliberal Britain. Obviously, like me, a bit of a lefty. And the idea here, George, I mean, the basic premise of his book and what he's sort of illustrating with some examples there is that as land was privatised, from the Thatcher era onwards, including council houses, something like 10% of the land owned by, now up to 20%, the land owned by the public through government, central and local government, has now been sold to privately. And so this has actually changed the all the sort of relations of, for example, changed the shape of our cities with privatised streets, private police policing them, that sort of thing.
I don't know, lefty or not, he sounded extremely sensible to me. And I think it's been an absolute disaster the way we have privatised the railways, privatised our essential services, energy, and water, and water in particular. I mean, it's mad. They don't do this in sensible European countries, and their railways run better and are cheaper. And it was a fear built that civil servants can't run organisations. Actually, the right civil servants can run organisations very well for the good of the people. And so I'm for renationalising the railways, renationalising the water and services, but we've let we've let the cat out of the bag, and it's going to be very difficult to get these cats back into the bag.
Well, Martin, not necessarily, is it? What's happened with the railways, for example, is that because the franchises haven't been able to make enough money, that they've just fallen back into public ownership without the public having to pay a penny.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's if you're going to nationalise things, you need to regulate it so tightly that they can't make any money at it. And when they start to lose money, they decide that they want to give it back to you because they can't make any money. They want to
walk away.
I mean, look at Thames Water now. That should basically be put through a bankruptcy procedure rather than renationalise. Renationalising implies paying something for it, when in actual fact it's not worth anything because they've run it into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth looking at this case this week, isn't it? We've just had a court case by a Liberal Democrat MP against Thames Water saying, no, we don't want you to have this massive bailout and loan because it's going to enable you to carry on the horrific practices that you've been carrying on for the last couple of decades. Yeah. But that's fallen, that's failed. And the other thing is that the Thames Water are using some of this money, George. I'm not saying this is your fault, but using some of this money for a court case to allow them to raise to take on Ofwat to raise 30% higher than they were otherwise be allowed to raise everybody's bills.
Yeah, I'm pleased you're not blaming me for Thames Water.
No.
I don't think there's much of a case to it. But actually, I've got a local example that was a really good one. When I was mayor, we were spending a ridiculous amount of money on a bad waste system, waste collection organisation. We managed to take them out and to get £20 million compensation from them, which enabled us to set up Bristol Waste. Now, Bristol Waste is not perfect, but it's a damn sight better, and I think has done a lot, a lot of good things that would never have been done if we'd been left with the private waste collection system.
OK, well, let's look at the speculators and developers now. And, George, I know you've been involved with the Bristol Zoo. Do you want to give us the latest there? Because this iconic, I hate using that word, actually, this wonderful old zoo, which I think is one of the oldest provincial zoos in the whole of Europe, has been sold. The idea is that this land is worth more for luxury housing. How's all that going? And they're shipping some of the animals out, I think, to some little, basically a little cops on the edge of the M5, so hopefully attracting more visitors, but not much there. So what's happening with the zoo?
Okay, I mean, I think there's a wee bit of exaggeration going on there, but nevertheless, I have been opposing the zoo being developed as a luxury housing development, as you put it. Under 200 new luxury flats with a small amount so-called affordable, which are completely unaffordable because so-called affordable in Clifton is unreachable by most people. So
we're talking 500,000 or something, or more?
Oh yes, oh yeah. No, there will be at least
700,000-800,000, a million.
Some of them will be
affordable. £1 million affordable houses. Yeah.
And so they say, well, they're going to make some of the gardens accessible to the public, but who would go out of their way in this fabulous 12-acre walled garden with some really interesting trees and biodiversity, having flats built all round it up to 6 stories, which may not sound high, but in its place it is very high. And who would go out of their way to go to a bit of open space that is in effect a garden of a posh housing estate? I can't see why they would. So this is it's a terrible rip-off by that was dreamed up by the Zoo Directorate and my successor Marvin Rees, and suddenly landed upon us, and it was a planning permission that was forced through by the Mayor's office, twisting the arms of councillors to vote for it, even if they weren't in favour of it.
Because the Mayor does not get involved in planning. That's completely separate.
No, the Mayor shouldn't get involved in planning, and I'm afraid he did get involved in planning several times. I was very careful not to get involved directly in any planning decision, or even indirectly in any planning decision, and that was a strong instruction that I had when I became Mayor. So this is the destruction of a really important part of Bristol history. We need houses. We need homes. That doesn't mean you build them anywhere. You don't build them in the middle of the parks. Bristol is famous for its zoo in many people's minds. And now I don't approve of caged animals, but it's a walled garden that could be a wonderful nature reserve and have other uses built around it. It's got some buildings there, but to hand it over to a developer just to build a set of posh apartments doesn't seem right to me.
And so, was there any success in pushing back against this? It seems obvious.
Well, there's currently
it's a big change of use, isn't it, for something?
A group of people. I mean, the ironic thing is, I have a share in the zoo. It has no financial worth, so I am a member of the zoo. It was given to me by somebody who had some shares and approved of what I was doing in terms of protesting against the development of this 190-year-old historic place. But what was the last question?
Well, was there any successful pushback?
Yeah, well, there is a separate group of people that have managed to get a judicial review that will be heard in early May, and we'll see what happens with that. But that is about the mainly environmental issues around the development.
The news this week is Acorn Property Group, which brought the former Bristol Zoo Gardens last month with plans for a major redevelopment scheme, has announced record profits and turnover of £106 million and has returned to profit. So they're very happy.
They won't have bought it. That was a bit of PR. They're there ready to buy it. They may have exchanged some sort of agreement to agree, but there will not have been a contract to buy it.
We'd also just like to cast your mind back to 2018, 2019 and the Bear Pit. Now, this is an area at the bottom of Stokes Croft, which is one of the, I suppose you might call, alternative district. There's a lot of homeless people around there, but then there's also some fantastic cafes, shops. A lot of small businesses cluster around Stokes Croft, and where that touches the city centre is the Bear Pit, a big roundabout at the bottom of Gloucester Road. And you made what some call a reckless decision to try and turn that into a kind of publicly curated art space. Which was, I mean, I think most controversial thing I can remember was when Mark Weston, who's the Conservative leader, who completely refuses to speak to me at all these days, he said we should remove this conscientious objector picture, which is in one of the subways, to do with one of the city councillors who'd actually objected to serving in the First World War, and there was was jailed, and there was a little picture about him, something about his life. That was taken away. The whole thing is now completely gone. So I mean, that was a project you tried to start, and I mean, in a way, I think it broke quite a lot of people's hearts to see that completely extinguished and every single wall painted grey.
I didn't try to start it. I allowed it and encouraged it because I thought that it was so Bristol, having all these various stalls and things around there. It became a little community within the Bear Pit, and some really interesting bits of public art, temporary public art, that they were taken away by the next administration. But and the double-decker bus that was dropped into it and things like that. I thought it was. It was a brilliant initiative. It was rough at the edges, but it had a spirit to it. Music was played there. Now it is just a boring sunken roundabout.
Mm. Well, I think one of the nice things was because stuff was changing quite regularly. You know, you walk down one of the subways and you'd actually think, well, that's just good. What's this? You know, and it would engage you as you're going to and from the city centre. Now it's just grey. But now there's other things happening. If you're stood in the Bear Pit or next to the Bear Pit, you hear these massive pile drivers demolishing, or whatever they are, demolishing the Premier Inn. And this new development is appearing there. Joe, I know you've written a book, not a book. The last one was the book. This one is about this enormous development right next to the Bear Pit, which is 2 enormous tower blocks. I think the biggest we've ever seen here in Bristol, the tallest.
Yes, so the purpose-built student accommodation block will be the tallest building in Bristol, and then there's an 18-storey co-living tower next to it.
Okay, what is this co-living?
Well, co-living. This is the new housing product that they're bringing out. That is basically student accommodation, but for young professionals or key workers. And so this, I think, this one was the second in the city. But there's now another one that's just come. A proposal that's just been put in the last couple of weeks on Coronation Road. Just south of the city centre, for 113 rooms.
I know you've also pointed out that things are rather different now. Back in the 1960s and the 70s, we had more of sort of amenity groups. You call them amenity groups. I'm thinking about maybe things like the Civic Society, etc.
Well, this is George's background, really, and that's. I mean, one thing I'm interested in. I mean, and there's a great book called "The Fight for Bristol," which is a record of that period when people like George were fighting against the harbour being filled in with concrete and this sort of stuff.
As of course, in many parts of London, it was. I mean, some of these docks were just built on.
Yeah, there were all kinds of crazy ideas. But I'm interested, George, in how you fit, how that landscape is different compared to back then, when you had these amenity groups, developing to fight back against the speculators and the development of the civic society and this kind of thing.
That story was really the story of early involvement, and the fight for Bristol was people fighting back very soon after consultation was a thing. Consultation didn't exist when I arrived in Bristol in the 60s. It was just the council do it. And I think that it was the first big move, that saving the city docks from being filled in. It's an unbelievable story now. Saving the city from being strangled with Birmingham-style ring roads and things like that, and spaghetti junctions over Totterdown and over the harbour and over Cannon's Marsh and up Brandon Hill and around, and crashing over Clifton and through, the university precinct and down to the M32, which then was part of that system itself. So it was unbelievable, really, what was happening post-war. But I think there came a stage when people started thinking it was worth getting involved and helping to change things. And we did stop some really, really bad stuff happening, but sounding bad stuff sounds a bit like Trump, doesn't it? But I feel now that people are feeling a bit helpless. And when things are driven through in spite of people's objection, people stop objecting because they feel that nothing can be done. And I feel we're in a really difficult place now in terms of this, as I say, planning by developer rather than planning by the people.
Well, I mean, it seems to me one important aspect of this today is that the people who are supposed to be imposing some sort of, critical standards on design and the rest of it, the officers in the planning department, Bristol now has a chief planner, that these people actually see themselves as really part of the same, the same operation as the developers.
They are. They're far too close to the developers.
You look at something like LinkedIn, and you can see these. You can literally see these senior planning officers at Bristol, liking and having this back and forth with developers in the city. It's just there, sort of.
I'm afraid
there's no sort of professional detachment.
I think that was a culture that developed. I'm very hesitant about being directly critical about my successor, but it was a culture that developed during his administration, and I think that he saw the way of housing people in Bristol as just giving a free-for-all to developers. But the ironic thing is that some of that was giving also a free-for-all to build huge office blocks and things that don't house anybody, such as is happening or is proposed at St Mary Le Port on the end of Castle Park, right at the heart of the old city. That you've been so involved with and been so good at researching. So I do think we need to have a pause, not a long pause, but enough to get some positive planning rather than just reactive planning.
That's surely not happening, is it, with this new Green administration, George? Nothing happening at all. They just I think the developers, the speculators, see them as a bit of a soft touch. Actually,
I think there's a problem that these developers have momentum. I've talked to some of the Green administration about this. I think they are absolutely concerned, and if you look at the way that the various councillors have voted at planning meetings, I think there is real concern by most of the Green administration about the brutal nature of some of the planning in Bristol and the way some neighbourhoods are being just run over by the developers. Of course it doesn't happen in the very vocal posh neighbourhoods, but it does happen in some of the inner the sort of outer inner areas, as I'd call them, that are suffering in terms of some of the development that's on their doorstep.
Yeah, Bedminster, I suppose, would be.
Bedminster Bedminster, Totterdown, around there. They are losing their views, losing their light, losing the nature of the place, the character of the place.
Well, you know what? In the national news, what we're hearing from the Starmer Labour government, I don't think you should use the word Labour, because they don't really seem to be adhering much to certainly the Labour views that I grew up with. But they're saying we've got to take the brakes off planning. We've got to give them even more freedom.
It's worrying. You're a builder or a blocker, and that is quite an unpleasant term. It means that anybody wants to do things in a better way and wants any pause at all in order to plan sensibly is now labelled a blocker or a NIMBY, and it's quite vicious. And I think it's driven a lot by the politicians through social media, So constructive criticism is now labelled as blocking.
Well, isn't it vicious because there's a lot of money to be made here?
That's largely that.
Yeah,
but they're also, the developer lobby are channeling people's frustrations about housing.
Absolutely.
And that gets with this false idea that everything is about supply.
Absolutely.
And people are understandably very frustrated and angry because you can't get on the housing ladder, and rent is incredibly expensive.
But we have an opportunity. There's a hell of a mess in North Bristol, but North Bristol has the biggest retail hub in the southwest. It's got a station that goes from, that connects the country pretty well. It's got a development that has been started. It's got a pretty good mess of housing. It's going to have this huge arena, which shouldn't be there, but sounds as if it's going to be.
There are rumours that there is anyway.
It's got a university. It's got a very large university. It's got a lot of the infrastructure that is already there. And I think that is an area where one could create a good new town that could house, say, 100,000 people. And because it has that connectivity, rather than just building as high as you can on any patch of land in Bristol.
But there's another bunch of people we're not really taking into account here. Something like maybe 1,500, possibly more people living in vehicles in Bristol now, because many of them have either been evicted because they can't afford to pay the rent for whatever reason, sometimes through relationship breakup, and others just simply because they need an income. They can get an income here, but they cannot pay the rent. So there's a meeting on Monday up at the Downs, up in the other side of Clifton, because what's happening is many of these vehicles are just parking up there because it's the only safe space. The council under Marvin Rees were trying to do something to move them on that they kind of just gave up really, because where are they going to move them to? We've got official transit sites next to a sewage works down in Avonvale, which has got nowhere near enough space for these people. So we're starting to get a sort of, not a tent city, but a caravan city building up, and the council doesn't really have a plan to deal with it. And none of the houses which will be building at Filton can be afforded by these people. They won't get a mortgage on one of those.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a complete mess too. You go up to the Downs now, it's not quite what it used to be, and I do think that it is one of the major challenges that the City Council has, is how can you deal with that in a sensitive manner.
Come on then. You've done the job. What would you recommend that they do?
Well, you've got to provide the places. I mean, there's no alternative but to provide the places for the people who do want to live in vans with the proper facilities, because, I mean, where are the facilities? If you live on the Downs in a van that hasn't got its own servicing, which very few of these vans do, where do you...
Hasn't the council got any land?
Well, they're talking about sites in Hartcliffe and Norwest. Right. But two of the most deprived areas of the city.
Yeah, I suppose the council could come in and sort of put some services in there, maybe some water, this sort of thing, some electricity hookups, that sort of thing. Yeah. So something needs to be done, but it doesn't seem to me...
You need a site that's properly serviced and supervised.
And not right on the edge of town, somewhere that people can actually get to jobs necessarily.
Where there are transport connections.
Yeah.
But this all, it's sort of, it is dystopian. And there is, I have this emerging sense the way Bristol could go is that you have this, sort of really nice centre with bike lanes and active travel and a sort of buzzy professional class, with the university.
Gentrified.
Yeah, very gentrified. And then you have people at total margins, to the point where we are now. People are living in vans, around the fringe, around the edge of the city, and it's the sort of next instalment you had, but between the wars and after the Second World War, you had working class communities pushed out to those new estates, and it will be the sort of final chapter of that, and I think that's a real danger.
It is.
Bristol, yeah.
I mean, the vans are possibly the most economical way the city can deal with any provision of intermediate housing. The city is strapped for cash, so they can't suddenly build a load of council houses. And anyway, if you build council houses, they within 5 years they can then be sold on. And I was the first, leader of city council of Bristol to build any council housing for 30 years. But I was warned that if I did so, it would just be subject to right to buy within 5 years. That is really slow. The one thing the positive side of the vans is an incredibly quick way of finding some form of interim housing, but it's a slum way of living unless you can, unless you have the access to the proper services. And I do think that parks that can, basically camping sites that can produce those proper services with good transport connections are the best way forward.
Okay, so finally, Joe, I wonder if you could just explain something about, we have talked about this a bit before, but about the business that's behind the building of this enormous tower block, and then see what George makes of that, because is it Menorah
Mivtagim?
Yeah, and they're also responsible for building this. We'll be talking more about Gaza later, particularly with Martin, etc. But they have built this town in the Negev desert, which the Israeli Defence Forces use for training for Gaza, and there they are building this student block.
They're one of the biggest, I think possibly the biggest asset management firm in Israel. And so with this tallest tower in Bristol, this purpose-built student accommodation block and the co-living, you have a British developer, Olympian Homes, and then they get the planning permission, and then they get the finance from institutional investors, and so this is going into they have a portfolio of student accommodation all over the UK, and financing that portfolio is Menorah Mivtagim, along with Kane International, who are a private equity real estate investment firm, founded and run by Jonathan Goldstein, who's been one of the most prominent pro-Israel lobby UK people. And Menorah Mivtagim are also connected to Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, who was, at the time that he became Trump's Middle East envoy in Trump's first presidential term in 2017, his family's business, which is a real estate investment firm called Kushner Companies, did a big deal with Menorah Mivtagim on a development in Maryland in America. So there. Yeah, my piece was called how Bristol's tallest building will be linked to Israel's atrocities, because there are, you follow the money, and there are very direct links to people who actually have been directly involved in creating the circumstances that have allowed this terrible genocide to happen.
So George, does it matter that this is where the money's coming from for this building in the Bear Pit?
Obviously, it matters. I think my biggest concern is, as somebody who believes in localism and that good things come out of local people investing, is that the profits from these developments go out of the city. I think a good place is a place where people invest in their own city. I don't have any money in anything outside this city. I mean, that's I have no shares. My pension owns my bakery, and that is the way I find is brilliant to live. Obviously, I have to buy things that are from makers that are outside the city. But I do think that it's so sad that the people who are really making money out of this city are taking it to other places. And this may be one of those, and an extreme example.
And it's a symptom of how, you know, global capital is just piling into the UK student accommodation market. There's a statistic in that piece where I think it's 47 last year. 47% of all worldwide capital flows into PBSA came into the UK.
That's the student purpose-built
student accommodations. So half of all the capital flowing around the world is coming into the UK, into the student accommodation market.
And they're built by huge corporations now. Well, it's much healthier if they're built by the small and medium-sized local contractors and local developers.
Look, before you go, George, I've got to ask you what you make of the Middle East conflict, because it's again this week horrifying pictures on our screens of kids, women, children. We've had something like between 40 and 50,000 residents of Gaza killed now in this, and yet we're still expected to think that we've got to give equal weight and equal balance to both sides. What do you make of the a bit of maybe the history, if you want, of the conflict? But I think most families watching this on their televisions are, when the kids are around there switching it off, they're horrified. It's sickening.
It is absolutely sickening. I mean, I said earlier on I hate violence. I mean, I was even talking about the little local violence about a protest in Bristol. But I have Jewish heritage. I just think that dreadful massacre that happened in October last year, October
20. It's actually 24, isn't it? Sorry, 23. October 23. 7th of October. Yeah,
has created an even worse massacre by many degrees, and I'm appalled by what the Israeli government is doing. Not the Israeli people, but what the Israeli government is doing. It is a form of genocide. You cannot get away from it. If you read the definition of genocide, it's heartless, and it's sadly backed by America and to a certain extent by this country.
Yeah, well, if people are interested in following you on X or anywhere else, George, where can they find you?
George Ferguson X.
Okay, well, George, thanks ever so much for joining us. We're just going to have a quick listen now to some of the just a bit of coverage from Gaza. This one is from Jeremy Corbyn this week.
I mean, it's completely deranged, their behaviour and what they're doing, and I am constantly astonished at the attitude of successive British governments on this. Clearly illegal, clearly a war crime to hit a school, take away water supply, take away electricity, stop food supplies going in, destroy a hospital. All of that is clearly illegal within the war crimes. And Israel is in breach not just of International Court of Justice, but also International Criminal Court and the Fourth Geneva Convention, not to mention numerous United Nations Security Council